make a strong point that the unconscious is not deep, it's on the surface. Lacan criticized a widespread representation of psychoanalysis, the idea that the unconscious is a kind of hidden layer within the mind that the analyst must explore as if descending into psychic depth. For Lacan, this spatial metaphor, depth versus surface, is misleading. The unconscious is not beneath consciousness as a hidden substance. Against the metaphor of death, in many popular readings of Freud, the unconscious is imagined as a deep stratum of the psyche, there where repressed contents are stored. Lacan considers that this image leads to a psychologization of psychoanalysis. The Freudian unconscious is not an inner region of the mind, but a system of functioning, a logic that manifests itself in the formation of discourse. For example, Bach, which I perform for you right now, is a structure under certain logic. The subject for Lacan will function in the same way. How? How does it manifest? Through the formation of discourse, dreams, slips of the tongue, jokes, symptoms. This is why Lacan insists that the unconscious is not sought in a hidden interiority, but rather is found where a language falters, breaks down, or produces ambiguities. I hope by now when I say ambiguities of language, perhaps the word signifier will come to you as a result of our interaction. The unconscious is a structure like a language, is the hypothesis, implies that its manifestations occurs in the signifying chain. When someone speaks, their discourse is not entirely controlled by conscious intention. There are shifts, double meanings, ambiguities, slips of the tongue appear, revealing another logic at work. This logic is the unconscious. This is why Lacan affirms that the unconscious is found on the surface of the speech. I repeat myself to make it clear this point. The unconscious manifests in these stumbles of language, where the subject says more than they intended. This is why Lacan insists that the analyst should not seek psychological depth, but rather listen to the materiality of the signifier. When Lacan states that the unconscious is not deep but superficial, he is not denying its unconscious dimension, but rather shifting the way we conceive it. The unconscious is not a hidden region of the psyche. It is a structure that manifests on the surface of language. So, I hope with this said, do you remember Nietzsche's phrase? That he had a phrase in which he said, I'm going to go to another dimension of our other course. There is a Nietzsche a phrase in which he says, he who has a reason to live can bear almost anything. I don't know if you are familiar, but it's a often quote a phrase of Nietzsche, and is celebrated as something somehow vitalist, just an affirmation of strength. However, if you articulate that with Lacan's theory of the drive and the warning about the alienating nature of meaning, it acquires a sinister reverse. What appears as the support of life can become its opposite, a point of deadly fixation. For Lacan, there is nothing more alienating than meaning, hasty understanding. The illusion of having grasped something functions as a logical precipitation that closes off the questions and halts the movement of desire. Hence his famous warning, "If you think you understood, you are surely mistaken." Quotation. When meaning solidifies, it ceases to be articulated in a chain. It does not admit displacement or critique. It becomes a death letter and acquires a rigidity very similar to that of psychotic certainty. That is the status of the master signifier, an S1 that does not connect, does not play, does not allow itself to be moved by logic. It's a stopping point that, far from guiding, petrifies. Psychoanalysis is the only discipline that works with the concept of drive, an unconscious negativity that can only be inferred from clinical facts. Freud called that our mythology. Lacan inscribes it in the real, an elusive yet constitutive dimension. The drive is the effect on the body of a discourse, and thus possesses a double inscription, signifying through the mark of the other with capital O, and real through the jouissance that affects the body. The fundamental hypothesis regarding its tendency towards the absolute, its blind, repetitive, excessive drive, is that it constitutes an unconscious attempt to eliminate the constitutive lack that language introduced into the subject. But this attempt is impossible. That's why the drive repeats, surrounds, insists, without ever being fulfilled. The result is beyond the pleasure principle. We are talking the territory of jouissance. For this reason, Lacan affirms that the only act fully achieved at the level of the drive should be the suicide. The only point where the lack would apparently be abolished. But because of this juncture between meaning and drive, the sum of a logical grasp with the drive's restorative attempt, Lacan warns that all meaning is religious. Solidifying meaning implies sacralizing it, turning it into something rigid, and this rigidity chains us to a jouissance that leaves us from being flexible. It becomes what Freud used to call a death drive. When meaning becomes a master signifier, that establishes no chains. It hardens and transforms into a dead letter. Trapped in an absolute why, we stop questioning the hows. And this stagnation petrifies us, dragging us towards the deadly inertia of the drive. Since all meaning generates more meaning, psychoanalysis does not dwell on semantics. Its objective is to generate the capacity to extricate ourselves from discursive chains in order to break with that master signifier that has become a particular religion. It is about preventing logic from stagnating and allowing a more fluid relationship with jouissance. That is to say, interpretation should not reinforce meaning, but rather divert it, puncture it, prevent from becoming an image that paralyzes the subject. Interpretation, Lacan said, must always be like Marcel Duchamp's ready-made. The essence of a word play is that our interpretation must point in that direction so as not to be what fits the symptom with meaning. A few words about the real, as I mentioned. reality is what works, but the real is what is against which one is that dimension against which one breaks. Reality is mediated by language, by norms, and by the stories we tell about ourselves. The real, on the other hand, designates that which does not fit completely into the symbolic order. That is why the real often appears as a point of discomfort, something we cannot fully explain, something that persists or disrupts the harmony of our explanations. It is not necessarily something spectacular. Often, it manifests as a small crack in meaning. In this sense, it could be said that as long as the real exists, our relationship with the world will never be completely comfortable. Discomfort, as a human condition, from this perspective, is not simply a mistake that should disappear if we found the right formula for living. Rather, it seems to be part of the very condition of the subject. Language allows us to organize experience, but it never manages to completely cover it. There is always a reminder. That reminder is what Lacan calls the real. And precisely because that reminder exists, psychic life never achieves perfect stability. The idea of total harmony with the world, a fully transparent reality, appears as a reassuring illusion. Growth without eliminating lack, if the real introduces a permanent limit, and inevitable questions arise. How can we think about possible personal growth? From a Lacanian perspective, growing would not mean eliminating lack or discomfort. That would be impossible. Rather, it would imply learning to position oneself differently in relation to it. The subject matures, we can say, when they stop to seek a definitive solution to the anesia and begin to recognize the structural place of that limit. Not everything is possible, not everything is understood, not everything can be said. Learn to live with it. In other words, growth does not consist of erasing the conflict, but of knowing how to live with it without becoming completely paralyzed. Is any happiness possible? Well, this does not mean that happiness is impossible. It means something more precise, that happiness cannot consist of total and permanent satisfaction. If the real always leaves a remainder that cannot be symbolized, then every form of well-being will necessarily be partial and fragile. But precisely for that reason, it can also be more concrete and less illusory. It is not about achieving absolute plenitude, but about finding singular ways of living, desiring and creating within that limit. In this sense, Lacan's concept, or Lacan's concept of life, I might say, is not organized about the elimination of anesia, but around the invention of ways to inhabit it. These are a few notes to start tonight. I prepared for you so we can discuss and perhaps further on our readings and our formal lecture, let's say, I present to you a PowerPoint and usually has this way of information, delivery, conclusion. This is not very psychoanalytic. I would rather leave you today with questions, conflicts, and easy of thinking regarding this theory, rather than give you a easy of mind saying, "Oh, I got Lacan. Okay, what's next? What's next author?" We didn't even start in the journey of Lacanian territory and its complexities. However, I did bring a PowerPoint just for clarity, just for perhaps creating resonance in yourselves and to bring some questions. We can discuss also a clinical case, but maybe I wanted to just reinforce what has been done so far. I will do it quickly in a PowerPoint, and maybe we can perhaps talk afterwards. Sarah, would you be so kind to maybe start the, I'll have it here printed, but just in case. Well, we are going to review a few concepts here. Some of them were your request, some of them were what I thought it might help tonight for a certain afternoon delight journey on Lacan's territory. That's what this course was, more or less. Please, let's move on to the next one. By now, everybody understands that when we talk about the subject, it's about the divide one. It is the subject that says more than what he or she intends and less than what he or she would like. And it's an interaction with the symbolic order. Lacan will call that letter A for French, autre, but capital O, the big other. Do you see the huge hypothesis and the concepts that we are dealing is that usually we talk and I talk for you and you answer me, or you talk for your friends, for your wife, for your husband, and you answer back. I undermining the concept of communication by saying that in every single act of discourse, the other with capital O is included. With that, let's move on, please, Sarah, if it's okay with you. Lacan invention, which is a logical need to support a structural system conceived from the clinic. You know, one of the myths we should perhaps take away is that psychoanalysis arose from psychoanalysis. It's not that, you know, it's not that psychoanalysis is a practice that became a practice by doing the practice. There is a collection, by the way, of Freud's concepts. You will be surprised how many of them are taken from other sources. And many of them, Freud himself said that. So theory and practice are intertwined. And Lacan's one of the creations was the object small a, or petit a, which you can perhaps individualize as the object cause of desire, is not the object we desire, but rather the cause. So the object we desire would be ahead, right? The object petit a is before. It represents the reminder produced by symbolization, and it is an structural leftover of the entry into language. I present to you last time, and perhaps I sometimes dedicate myself to the interaction or articulation of music and psychoanalysis, because one of the very first things we lose is the la 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 of our mothers when we enter signification. And I think a re-encounter with that la 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 is our encounter with music, which, by the way, is a huge area of humanity colonized by the real, by the signifier, in the sense that a note has no meaning unless it's related to another one in a logical relationship. It's exactly the same proposition or theory that Lacan proposed to understand the subject. Okie doke. Let's move on, please, Sarah. So, as the unattainable imaginary cause of desire, the object A represents the fundamental lack. It has often the status of the real. For example, Lacan in Seminary 10, The Anguish, relates that, if you remember, they say that fear has an object. Freud said that, but anguish does not. Lacan would say that the object of anguish is the object A, and it has a logical implication as a part of the subject, because the object A, as the cause of desire, is structurally, intrinsically related on every human action. Represents what cannot be symbolized. Have you ever had a conversation with anybody in which you felt and you were left with something, said, I don't know, but I wanted to say something more, but I still don't know what was it? This remnant of our interaction with the symbolic is a constant presence, not in the psychoanalytic clinic, but in the life of the speaking being. Let's see how, please Sarah, can we go to next and we will see the object and desire. As I mentioned before, desire is structured around the lack. The subject endlessly circles around this lost object. And in order to talk about the object and the relationship with it from the subject, Lacan creates the formula of, in French is phantasm, which in English exists the word, right? Phantasm, right? Not ghost, like a phantasm, because it's a primordial fantasy. It has nothing to do with daydreaming, or it's an structural fantasy, which might call the primordial. It's the relationship between the subject and the object A. And Lacan made a formula of that. Would you mind, Sarah, we go to next one? If you follow me there, the formula is this: the device subject, the symbol losange, means the relationship back and forth between the device subject and the object of desire, the object A. It's because of this fantasy that we can protect maybe I should have found a better word. We can deal with reality if we have a structured fantasy, which is not imagination. It's an important question that we as speaking beings ask from a very early age. What am I for the desire of the other? The whole process of an analysis is to determine which is the primal fantasy of each one of us. Okay, Sarah, let's continue. I'll try to make it simple today. Fantasy or phantasm is, the subject desire doesn't appear spontaneously. It needs a scenario. It's like a frame, a window in which we can see a certain fantasy. This is a sort of a script that we actually don't know. Do you know that in medieval times, in the tribes of, I think, Asia, but it was also in Western civilization, there was a messenger that let's say any emperor or somebody will send a messenger with a message inscribed on its head. The messenger didn't know what the message said. Many messengers were killed, by the way, under that way of communication. But the fact remains that we all carry on our lives with a certain script that we don't know. For example, I give you here a very cliche, but if someone repeatedly desires partners who reject them, the subject might say to you in a session, I really like to meet somebody, I don't know why I want love. But only through the study of the primordial fantasy, we might arrive to the unconscious fantasy very different from the one spoken, being one such as, I'm the one who is abandoned. Could we please continue, Sarah? As I mentioned before, and in English the translation is anxiety for the seminar, but the original is is about anguish. So in seminar 10 that I mentioned before, he states anguish is not without an object. And in fact, Lacan was very accepting of emotions, not because we don't deal with them. If a patient cries, we offer tissue. Somebody needs an emotional support, we can talk from the imaginary. But we are far or misguided if we think the truth of the feeling is because somebody is crying and saying it. The only emotion that doesn't lie, Lacan says, is anguish. When the distance between the subject and the object A collapses, anxiety happens. Pardon me, please, for being a little cryptic. I'm trying, for the sake of time, to go through this and create questions and movements and see where we go from there. Sarah, please, let's go through the next one. So, if object A belongs to a formula and is a letter that Lacan called, even he said he's lying, but he said it was my only invention, which is not true. But it's a central point in Lacan theory, and it relates to the theory of discourse. because this discourse structures social bonds. Each discourse organizes the circulation of signifiers and jouissance. There are many types of discourses, you know. Do you know the performative action of a discourse? The word has the power to change completely reality from the moment that somebody says, do you accept for this girl, this guy to be your lawful, how do you say? Husband or wife? The moment somebody says yes, reality changed. So discourse has the same performative action in the subject, the materiality of discourse, the words we said, because they don't involve just meaning. They involve also a way of enjoyment that I call jouissance. It's not that I call jouissance. We study in this course as jouissance, that zone of pleasure and pain area, the area of excess beyond the pleasure of the principle of pleasure. Sarah, please, let's try to continue on the next one. I will try to give a quick account on some discourses that Lacan pay attention because they structure things that we found on the clinic. And Lacan selected 4 discourses. No, Sarah was yes, there, thank you. In seminar 17, he talked about 4 different types of discourses. It's the discourse of the master, the discourse of the university as the place of knowledge, let's say, the hysteric discourse, and the discourse of the analyst. And this relates in formulas. I didn't write a formula, but just to show you briefly, well, Sarah, let's move to the next one, please, and I will show you right there. There are 4 elements. You will put one above the other, and another fraction, one above the other. For example, S1 over S2, divide X over A, and we rotate one element. So we have always 4 different types of formulas. And the S1 will mean the master signifier. The S2 is knowledge. The cat S is a divide subject. And as we talk, the object A is the object cause of desire. Sarah, let's continue, please. In this way, we have 4 agents, and each of them will have its status. So you have, for the first one, the agent, the other, the truth, and the product. And if you rotate these elements, which I'm going to try, I'm not going to go too much in detail tonight, but you will have these discourses in this way. Please, the next one, Sarah. For example, in the master discourse, you will have S1 over S2, the signifier, the master signifier over the other, and then on the other side you will have truth, which is the result, is the divide subject, and the product, the object A. So the master signifier organizes knowledge, and object A appears as a surplus enjoyment. Do you see this, that this element of surplus is inherently part of any human condition we can imagine? Do you know that we might not need an extra phone, but Apple or any company knows very well about this surplus enjoyment. The whole industry of capitalist society is based on that. Lacan tried to create the surplus in Marx equivalent in the clinic of the object A as a surplus of enjoyment. That we are not ever satisfied. If we are in Instagram and we want a like to see how many people will like us, we are not going to be satisfied with 10, 50, 100. There is always a surplus of enjoyment that we will always remain unsatisfied and search for more. Talking about that, as I brief mention to you, as I present lectures in several different places, I always get hit from the right wing and from the left wing, because Lacanian is a position that he was very critical of the Marxist conception of language, of the outcome of the Soviet Union, and of the events of May 1968 in France. And he always suggests that the revolution was another way to install a master signifier on a different color. At the same time, he criticized completely the structure of capitalism and the whole idea of well-being produced by the new object, a new object that will never satisfy. So the master discourse is that S1 over S2 and S divided over A. Let's change that, and please, Sarah, let's continue, and you will have the university discourse, which is knowledge S2 over A, and you will have S1 over the device subject. What predominates on this is knowledge. The subject becomes object of knowledge. If you think about university and papers, this is what we become. This truth that a certain paper will acquire only because it's an agent of knowledge. The problem is that eludes or obliterates the divided subject. For the divided subject, we have the ideal. Please, Sarah, let's continue on this. For the divided subject, you will have the agent will be the device subject over the S1, the master signifier. Here you have the hysteric subject questioning the master, and then you will have rotation of the letter A will produce knowledge. Do you know how many scientific experiments were dedicated in Descartes' time to princesses? If you read the letters of Descartes or other philosophers, they will always be in touch with that sort of princess, and the princess will always question from the position of the hysteric. I have something more to say about that, but it's so controversial that I save it for the talk. Maybe let's continue, please, Sarah. The analyst, however, when you place the analyst is positioned in the object A. If you position the analyst as an object A, as an object cause of desire, you will have a device subject, and a place of truth will be the knowledge, the outcome of it, and the product will be the master signifier, the one that the patient says the very first time he talks. So this provokes the subject speech. This is the discourse of the analyst. you will see that it's the opposite of the discourse of the master. Okay, Sarah, would you mind? We are going to go rush into Lacan moves from linguistics, because you see what Freud didn't have and Lacan is the use of linguistics, and Lacan will add logic and eventually mathematics and then topology, because it's a way to formalize what? This self, which is the human being, the speaking being, which is not closed. The conception is not Freudian like an egg or many other ideologies or theories in which the subject is closed, but rather open. So how can we formalize? And for that, I mentioned the registers that we start the first class: the real, the symbolic, and imaginary. Next one, please, Sarah. If you remember our first meeting, we talked about the imaginary, and remember the stadium of the mirror stage I present to you the first time as the ego as a place of alienation, as we are not the one who believe we are, since we are intertwined with the other from the get-go, from the very start. And this, of course, involves language. They are linked like in a Borromean knot, according to Lacan, and the thing is that in order to consist, they cannot separate, the three of them. Sarah, please, the next one. Because if one rings cut, all rings separate. So the consistency depends on the linkage of these three registers. And by now I have to tell you that one of the most common ways of linking three registers would be a four-knot, which for many people is the paternal metaphor, what Freud used to call Oedipus complex, and Lacan refers as the paternal metaphor structures the law of the symbolic. And that is what allows these three registers to remain. But that doesn't work for everybody. It works for many. It would be like highway. Do you take I-10 to go downtown if you are in the Memorial area? You can go by the highway and you would be with many one on the paternal metaphor. But you might choose, I don't know, go by the street. Free feeder and then take Memorial and then another street and go to downtown circling it. That's what happens in many subjective structures. There is a detour in order to function. I am anticipating the word Santom, which is coming very soon. Okay, Sarah, please, let's continue. The clinical importance of this theory is that psychopathology can be understood as a disturbance in the knot. A psychoanalyst working in a hospital for emergencies might decipher which structure is he or she facing that night in a speaking being. By this theory, we can determine if we are talking about a psychotic case or neurosis on a brief first approach, and needed of more. But the structures are not interlocking. You know, there's other psychoanalysis that talk about borders and the immixtion of structures. Not here. In this account, neurosis, psychosis, and perversion are the different structures. To be honest with you, in late psychoanalytic literature in the last 20 years in Argentina, France, there has been developments in terms of writing about the borders of neurosis, the border of psychosis, which cases are on the border and why. Is autism a structure, or is a particular case of neurosis or psychosis? Autism is also an area that psychoanalytics works, even though it seems paradoxical for the fact that it's the famous talking cube, right? Let's go to the next one, please. So in the 70s, and late Lacan, he will talk to the modes of noting. How can we arrive to a singular or particular way of understanding subjectivity by the way that the imaginary, the real, and the symbolic are arranged on each structure. So we are moving to understand case by case. Can we please move on? And that's why Lacan creates this word that he developed in his 23rd seminar. You know, each seminar was a year long. In his 23rd, he developed the word symptôme. Symptôme is an archaic French spelling from symptom and represents in unique way the subject, not the three registers. And the symptom is different from symptom. Sarah, can we go to next one? Because, you know, if we think about since Freud or any others of Freudians, a symptom is an interpretable formation of the unconscious. Lacan remained faithful to this statement until the end. I don't agree with at the school that I belong to, with the idea that there are three Lacans and they are very different one from each other, and the clinic varies. Actually, Lacan from the very first one talks about the structures and allusions to mathematical representations, and in the very last ones, it still talks about the signifier. So the symptom, however, is different than le symptôme is different than the symptom in the sense that it's a way of stabilizing function of jouissance. And the difference with the symptom, that somebody, when they come with a symptom, they say, please get me out of this. The symptom, the difference is that it's not necessarily something to be solved, because it might be more a solution than a problem. Sarah, can we please continue? One of the ways Lacan approached this concept was reading the literature of James Joyce. For Lacan, James Joyce was psychotic structure. However, he didn't develop symptoms. And Lacan established that by the neologisms and playing with language, James Joyce found a way of jouissance. You know that people said that when he was writing in his studio, you can hear from far distance the laughter of James Joyce composing and writing. For him, it stabilizes psychic structure. And if it worked for him, could it be like there is a clinic of a symptom that is possible only for psychotics? Not necessarily. For example, you know, Wittgenstein, for Lacan, Wittgenstein was also a structure of psychotic structure, but he made a name. He overcome the lack of the metaphor of the father, the signifier of the name of the father, by making himself a name. The same with James Joyce. Joyce was laughing, saying that for the next 200 years, the college, university students will be trying to imagine what I meant. He created a way of stabilizing. So, please, the next one, Sarah. I'm just finishing quickly. The function of this symptom is tying together as a fourth knot. It's a fourth knot that allows to function, that the real, symbolic, and imaginary don't get disarray, acts as a fourth ring in the Borromean knot, and provide a subjective, well, consistency was the word I translate, but it's actually, it would be stability, functionality. Because, for Lacan, the body, our consistent body, the one that we touch, is imaginary. Okay, let's continue, please, Sarah. So the clinical orientation in this at these Lacan's seminars from the 20, 21, 2, 3, 4, the goal of analysis shifts the symptom as symptôme, is jouissance rather than meaning. So there is not only interpretation, but the particularity of each subject. By allowing the subject to assume their symptom, we are not trying to adapt, or we are not strengthening the ego, but we are trying to help the subject to find their own solution, their own arrangement. And please, Sarah, the next one, we can say that the end of analysis involves that for either you talk on the clinic of the Borromean knot or the clinic of the signifier and the symptom or symptom. In either one, it's about a new relationship with jouissance. Sarah, could you please show the next one? This new relationship to jouissance is, in this stage, the subject identifies with their symptom. It's a particular solution that replaces universal norms. And to end, just the last one, Sarah, I tried to make it on time. Each analysis is unique in the sense that there should be a different knotting, a singular knotting for each analysand. And the way that we work that is how to deal with the subject's particular way or mode of jouissance. As Sarah, please, the next one, as I hope are for you fragmentary conclusions, because as Lacan, I'm trying also to avoid closing the meaning of something, but rather aim to opening questions. The Lacanian psychoanalysis that I described is not normalization, but a new relationship with jouissance. At this point, object A, discourse, topology, and symptom, they are a coherent clinical framework used by many psychoanalysts. And the symptom represents the subject's unique way of inhabiting jouissance. This tendency to the excess that we all have. Well, I have some notes that I wanted to say with you, but perhaps it's a good time to start perhaps having a talk. And I brought, however, Sarah, do you have a fragment that I brought from Lacan? Did I send it to you? It says class 4 Lacan, seminar 3. Would that be possible to send that to everybody and to show on the screen? And if possible, that would be great.
Okay, just one moment, let me verify.
If I have the time, I would like to mention Dora's case, but we might not have the time. It depends on the questions or things that perhaps I was able to raise in you I remember one of the questions, a Ralph question. Eva, I also remember your question, but I have no idea about. I was searching Lacan's doctoral dissertation. There is no mention of Ferenczi as a reference. He probably was influenced or not. I don't have an answer on that, but I know that many concepts are sort of flowing among authors. Nobody can claim sometimes original thought on that. But I remember Ralph's question alluding to the idea that we only have words for dreams, because Freud himself made a contradictory affirmation by saying that dreams are images. But Lacan has something to say about that, about dreams. And thinking about you, Ralph, and your question, I found this excerpt from Seminar 3, which I am sending it to you. But if it's a problem, Sarah, we can read it here out loud, and it's okay too.
I just placed the link in the chat, and I can share my screen as well.
Awesome as usually, as normal, Sarah. You're awesome. So, shall we read all together, or do you want to read it for yourself and have a sense of Lacan for yourself? We can have 5 minutes for each one of you, and is that okay? Is that up to you, guys? I want you to have the first-hand sensation of reading Lacan and saying, you have no idea how many frustrations I got in my life through this guy. So please have 5 minutes, a few minutes, 3-4 minutes. It's just less than a page. It's just this, less, almost a page.